Clean Energy Finance and Administration Committee meeting of Wednesday, February 26, 25 at 3:05 p.m. And we have roll call, please.
Yes, alternate director Srinivasan,
Present.
alternate director Risto,
Present.
Showalter,
Here.
Scozola.
Here.
Thank you. We're currently missing Director Mohan, who is expected shortly, but we do have a quorum of our committee.
Thank you. Next on the agenda item is the consent calendar, approval of minutes of November 25th, 2024, Finance and Administrative Committee meeting. Is there a comment?
Move approval.
Should we open public comments?
Yes, please. We'll open it
Before
up.
that, yeah.
No hands raised.
Okay, so I close public comment now. Well,
Second.
thank you. Can we have roll call, please?
Yeah, and we actually don't have to do.
We don't have to do that?
No.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, it's a.
I'll abstain because I wasn't and didn't get to review anything.
Thank you. We'll note that for the record.
Thank you. Next is CEO update.
I have no CEO update today. Well, I guess I can share the news that we shared earlier before the board meeting started, or the finance committee meeting started. So we officially are owners of 298 South Sunnyvale Avenue, the building here in downtown Sunnyvale. We are the owners as of last Friday. We received the keys, and so we're arranging for a tour of board members if they'd like to see the building, but it's very excited. We have an RFP that just went out to help us to select a project manager to help us with the design of the building. So the interior design.
The interior.
Because it's built. Yeah. So anyway, very excited about that. That's my CEO update.
Congratulations.
Exciting. It's really very exciting. And,
Yeah, a little nerve wracking, but exciting too. Yeah. The build out of space, but yeah.
and just to review that the price was approximately $20 million.
No, and we can't talk about the price, unfortunately.
You can't talk
because
about
we
the
have a
price. Okay, never
confidentiality
mind.
agreement on that, but yeah. But Andrea will send out an article that appeared in the Silicon Valley Business Journal about the building. You'll get to read a little bit more about it there.
Good.
Thank you. Next on the agenda item is elect chair and vice chair of 2025 Silicon Valley Clean Energy Finance and Administrative Committee. Do we have any nominations or no nomination for chair? I'm nominating myself.
I would support that as well.
It's a second.
How about vice chair? Okay.
I would support that as well.
We don't have to have any roll call, right?
No, so I'll just confirm then alternate director Srinivasan, you are the motioner, and then Director Scozola is the second.
Okay. Sounds good.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstain? That carries. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Next is planning and budget process and proposed finance stress test scenarios. Any of here? You have a big up.
All right, so I will kick it off, and then I'll also note that joining me is Scott Rigglesworth. He's our Director of Risk and Analytics. Scott joined us about in June of last year, and he comes from Ascent Analytics with extensive background in energy risk management. He was consulting for a lot of clients, including CCA clients, and before that, he had about 17 years experience at a AES utility. Okay, so we'll begin with the planning. So first of all, welcome to the Finance Committee, and thank you for being a member. We appreciate that. I'll give a brief overview. This will be a review of what we've shared last year. So for some of you, this will be a review, and then we'll talk about the proposed proposed stress test that we do, how that factors into our planning and budgeting process. So with that, I have the clicker. I already went through I'll just briefly go through the agenda again. It's an overview of our planning process. We'll seek your feedback on the proposed financial stress tests. I also go through the planning and budgeting timeline that we do for developing our budget. And this will tie into the next agenda item as well. And then Scott will give you an overview of the enterprise risk management and stress testing process that we have that's key part of our budgeting and risk management process. And he'll also give you a key drivers, remind you of some of the key drivers of our financial risks that we face. And we'll review planned financial stress scenarios for this year. And there are some additional scenarios we're considering that we're not in a position to discuss at this committee meeting, but we may at the next committee meeting, which is likely to be in May. And some of those scenarios would be appropriate under the Brown Act rule, would fall under the closed session rules. So take all that into consideration. Okay, so this is a high-level picture of how we serve our mission. We start at the bottom with an enterprise risk management. So this is sort of a comprehensive assessment of risk and opportunities. So what we do as an organization, we all, from every member of our team, we basically comprehensively say, what are some of the key risks and opportunities, that we face in the organization as it affects our mission? And then some of those surface to a high level that board members will see as a strategic focus area for the year. And a lot of these don't change, but there are some enhancements or some new risks or opportunities that come along the way. And the rest of them fall into our individual department and individual team goals. And then aligned with these strategic focus area and the risks and opportunities is how we develop the fiscal year's budget. So this is sort of our budgeting and planning process. We start off with the enterprise. We kick off the program. Actually, we kind of started in December, but it goes into February where we do a comprehensive assessment. We meet with each of the teams. Everyone in the organization participates. Then we have this meeting in February, the Finance and Admin Committee meeting. This is where we review the proposed tests we're going to do for financial stress tests. And then in the May timeframe, usually around May, it doesn't have to be May, but that's usually a good timeframe, is when we will then review the results of the stress tests. And as I said, we may have some additional stress tests that we will discuss with you at that point. And you may or may not be completing them at that time, but we'll give you a status of that. And then the budget framework. So this is at the time we start thinking about next fiscal year's budget. So what are some of the key framework that we can get feedback on so that if there are some key assumptions that shape the budget that we should take into account as we develop the budget that we will then bring to the Finance Committee meeting in August. And in June, the stress test goes to the board and the board reviews the stress tests. And then in August, we will have a Finance Committee meeting. In July, we did have no committee or board meetings. So in August, this will be a very short turnaround time because we have to, by our budget policy, we have to submit a draft budget for the board in August. So we will convene a Finance Committee meeting very early in August where the committee will get a chance to review the draft budget. And in that budget, we'll recommend reserve targets that the stress test will basically give us insights as to what level of reserves we should target so that we have adequate financial liquidity and financial means to withstand model risk scenarios should they occur. And these are usually extreme but plausible scenarios that we model. Then August 13 is when we will submit the draft budget to the board. This is an opportunity for the board to review the budget. And if the board has any feedback, comments, We seek that from the board. And September 10th, my birthday, is the day we will take the budget for approval. That was planned that way, right?
Happy birthday to you. Yeah.
Then budget is very important for us, and it's we monitor our financial position continuously. And one of the key things affecting the budget is where PG&E rates will come out and where PCIA, and the PCIA again is a sort of a fee that we pay to PG&E. So when when all our customers were part of PG&E, PG&E said we build a power procurement portfolio, and the financial obligations of the portion that was bought for your customers go with your customer. So basically, we've been paying into the PCIA, and that basically reflects the above market cost of those resources that they procured on behalf of our customers. So that's a key determinant of our financial picture. We'll get into that when we go through the media budget presentation, and Scott will go through that when he highlights the key risks. And November is a time frame. Last year, there was a lot of delays and a lot of drama going on around PCIA rates and PG&E. I won't go into that story, that could take a while, but some of you will remember. So that's a time when the energy division of the CPUC sets out basically what the forecast rates will be, called market price benchmark, that will be used to measure the PCI portfolio, how much above market it is. And those are the key metrics that affect what PCIA will be, and also gives us insight into what PG&E's rates will be. We don't know final rates, but once we get those key metrics, we can pretty accurately predict. For example, last year, our projections came in within 2 million. We didn't get each line item correct. Some went up, some went down, but in aggregate, we're $2 million off, and in this case, 2 million for the positive. Titus Bogley is our financial analyst, is the person who goes through and grinds all those calculations. So that's why I'm looking at him.
Hard to predict weather, but
Easier to predict weather than even a year out from now than PCIA. So that's why we do another refresh. And when we take the budget in September, we ask the board, this is the time to look at all the other costs, like staffing costs, operating costs, but not necessarily power supply costs too, but not necessarily our revenues, because the revenues will be determined pretty much by what this PCIA and PG&E rates will come out. And we tell the board, wait for making any final decision on spending money that we don't know whether we have or not. Wait till December when we'll have a better picture. And then once those rates come out, then we do an update of only our revenues and power supply costs. Power supply costs, if I forecast it today, tomorrow it's going to be different because it's market prices. Market prices go up and down every minute, every hour of the day. So every opportunity we get to update the budget, we will update the power supply costs, and we want those to be somewhat aligned with the revenue update, because both are determined by market prices to some extent. And then, so December, we take what we call the adjusted budget to the board, and sometimes you'll see in our slides, we slip out mini budget. Sometimes we call it mini budget because it's actually the most strategic part of our budget setting, because that's when we talk about our actual finances, but mini in the sense we don't update all of our department costs and all these other costs, which we take care of in December. And then in February, we meet again, as we're meeting today, discuss following year's financial proposed stress tests, and then also look at the mid-year budget that we'll be submitting to the board. Because every mid-year, we do another refresh, and this time we do refresh everything. So we true up for the actual rates we got in that went into effect in January, as well as our power supply costs, as well as full department costs, any staffing cost changes. So it's another full adjustment to the budget. This is sort of a highlight, and this also gives you some key dates as to when this committee will be meeting. So next meeting will likely be in May, and then again, we'll meet in August. Won't have too much time in August, but I have to meet very quickly in August because before we have to submit, so we can incorporate any comments you have very quickly because you'll have to submit the draft budget to the board in a few days of the finance committee meeting. And then we'll likely meet in November and then in next year's February. Any questions on the timeline?
Why is it in March, it's called mid-year budget because the budget is adopted in December?
Because we're working off of the September, that's the annual budget gets adopted in September. So March is sort of the mid-year of that, and that's when we do the full budget update. December, we introduced a few years ago because it was just impossible to predict PCIA and PG&E rates. And like, let's not even bother, let's do it. It's very key to our finances. Let's do that update in December. And I think this is working out well.
So our fiscal year starts January to December or
Fiscal year starts October 1st
October 1st?
and then September 30th. It's a good question, yeah.
That's kind
All
of-
questions are good, but.
No, but that's kind of a hard beginning of the.
October 1st to September 30th? That's the water year.
It's federal fiscal year too.
What?
It's federal fiscal year.
Oh, yeah.
And I should also let you know there's an audit committee that's separate from the finance committee meeting. So audit committee will be meeting this Friday. Our financial audit is complete. We have a clean audit. The auditors will present the results of the audit to the audit committee this Friday. And then the board will be receiving the results of the audit at the March meeting.
Any other questions?
Okay, now I get to turn it over to Scott, walk us through our risk management process.
All right, well, hello, everyone. So we will kind of swing through this. I don't mind if you just speak up and interrupt me if you have a question. Certainly don't feel like you have to hold back anything. So stress testing and enterprise risk management. So an ERM, right, is something comprehensive. So it's not just one element, it's kind of overarching. And it looks organization-wide. And as Amrit pointed out, we're not only looking for what you would typically think of bad scenarios as risks, but also the opportunities that come from uncertainty, things that we can position ourselves to capture value for our customers, our communities, and so forth. As Amrit laid out in the schedule, it does require a bit of diligence and discipline. And we want to be sure that we're managing optimally. We don't want to take ourselves off course, overreact to some news or an event or something like that. And we want to plan to, again, capture those opportunities. So we go through a process. I'm going to touch on that on the next slide a little bit as to how we evolve through that process. Part of an ERM is stress testing, okay? It's not the only element. And in fact, stress testing is a fairly, I'll say, discrete process. If this happens, then what will the result be? We do other risk assessments that are more ranging, if you will. For example, in the risk committees, we report gross margin at risk, and that's through lots of modeling simulations, right? But this stress testing is important because we can tie it back to discrete inputs of things and what happens if things happen. An interesting element of that in our space is the interrelatedness of risk. So, for example, if there is a hot summer and there are high customer loads and there are high prices, and so some of those things all correspond to one another and move together. So when we do a stress test, we'll often contemplate those events happening in a fashion consistent with how they have occurred historically or fundamentally happen. There is this last bullet point for commodity trading portfolios and inherent weaknesses in risk measure that I was just describing. Assessing a black swan event is important. So if you're familiar with the black swan, right? Swans are white. On a rare occasion, you end up with a black swan, and it's not expected, but it happens. And there are events that happen that we would consider black swans that don't fall within the range of high probability or reasonable probability, but are kind of the really extreme sort of event. Coming from Ascend, the number one that pops into my head is actually in Texas when they had their giant winter storm in 2021. And so that was a black swan. Nobody's models contemplated that event happening and then the subsequent events related to the system breaking down. So it's important that we do stress testing. The next slide kind of gets at how we go through that stress testing process. So it starts with a risk register. And we like to joke that this is everybody's favorite thing to do at SVCE, to go in and log things in the risk register. Everybody appreciates and knows it's important, but it is one of those things that's kind of like, oh yeah, it's that time of year again. So we've worked with the team since the fall to get an inventory of what the risks are. It is intentionally small such that it can't be read here because it's kind of confidential and we don't want to, fly our risks around like a flag to everyone. But it's something that we spend a lot of time talking through, and the risks, some of them are quantifiable and easy to say, this is what happens if this happens, and others are kind of more qualitative and we don't really know what the effect is. So the next thing is to create a risk matrix that's a rubric, and it basically says, what is the likelihood of certain things happening? And what is the impact to us, right? So you basically are able to go through this and look at it in such a way that allows you to put the risks in each of those 25 boxes effectively. Then what we do is we decide from that, we care most about the things that are high likelihood and of more consequence, right? So we go through it and we survey the risks that have been put into the matrix and identify the ones that we want to consider for stress testing to bring to you. So we have, I think, close to 100 that were identified. We don't bring you all 100 and go through them in great detail, but we do pick the ones that we feel are most important for you to be aware of and to understand the impact or drivers of. So that's what will materialize as the stress tests. The next slide gets at one of the big ones that we tackle each year and that Amrit mentioned, which is the PCIA. There is a dynamic present that says when prices are high and PG&E calculates their generation rate and their PCIA, that's actually beneficial to us. But if prices go low, then PG&E keeps more through the PCIA to compensate themselves for that portfolio Amrit mentioned, and their generation rate goes down. And so what we end up with is a squeeze, if you will. So there's a dynamic there that impacts our top line revenue that flows through to the business and funds our reserves and programs and so forth. And so stressing this to extreme levels and accounting for what happens under these circumstances will be a key element of the financial risk drivers. The next slide kind of shows this in a matrix kind of format. So there's a lagged effect also. So as Amrit mentioned, the mini budget, that's when PG&E sets the rates that get used for 2025. But when the year is over, they do the actual math and they put something into 2026 that's a true up to 2025, all while also setting a rate for 2026. The market through the winter, for example, came in much lower than even expected, forward said. So the prices were very low for December and January in California. And so that will put pressure on the annual calculations for true up here. So we're kind of living this right now. We don't know how the full year will shape up, but we're monitoring it. And it will definitely be something that we account for in the next set of stress tests. You'll see a bit of it when Amrit gets to the budget too. The next slide gets at what we will do as financial stress tests. So these are things that we will definitely be doing and bringing to you. Forward price collapse to the first percentile. So that will be the interrelated, correlated effect of what does our portfolio cost look like? How do our assets and hedges look, our supply? How does our revenues look with a lower gen rate and a higher PCIA? We'll bring that all together into a stress test that looks at what price collapse impact is for us. We will also look at economic recession and loss of customer load, so volumetric loss of customers. Uncollectible increases, so if customers go to non-payment, the impacts that would have on us, and a reduction in financial liquidity. So if markets turn a certain way, dynamics can happen where you get up against thresholds with counterparties, you have to post cash, the counterparties could fail. There's all sorts of different combinations of events that can happen due to financial liquidity for us and potentially for our counterparties impacting us. All right, the next slide. So there's additional stress tests that we are going to do. We don't want to, we're still evaluating exactly what those are. And they might be large, they might be small, but we're considering which ones to bring to you. There were quite a few that the staff advocated to bring up. Some of them are ones that we feel are hit the bottom line. Other ones are a little more ambiguous. And some might be ones that we have to address in a closed session due to confidentiality. So we'll bring those to you at a future meeting. And the next slide, I think, is, yes, the next steps. So consistent with Amrit's schedule he presented, we're going to be setting up these stress tests to conduct them to bring to the May meeting, then to the board in June. And then that will in part evaluate where reserve holding targets ought to be positioned given those stress tests. So part of the analysis is when we weather one of these black swan events, do we have enough cash in the bank to kind of survive it, right? So almost like self-insurance in some respect, if you think of it that way. And so we will be bringing to you what the reserves ultimately look like under each of those stress tests. We will, like I said, bring to you other stress scenarios that we will look at, and then as well as identifying how it'll shape next year's budget and strategic focus areas. We're always, I don't think any of us consider this process and the dates involved to be points in time where we have to have it all figured out. If something happens along the way that we need to actively manage the business, people raise their hands and we do the right thing. But on this cadence, we will use this information to help inform the sorts of things that need to go into next year's budget, how we need to react and be prepared. And I should mention a big part of all this is the organization's resiliency and ability to mitigate these risks. So some of the risks that might be catastrophic are things that maybe move into a less catastrophic or more manageable state because we position the organization to mitigate them, and people tactically and operationally take the steps necessary to achieve that. So, all right, I said a lot. I will see if there's any questions, and otherwise hand it back to Amrit.
I had a question related to the Black Swan events. Obviously, it's kind of unpredictable. In recent history, what was it, just 22 or 23, we had that massive heat wave in September, and that was really close to the breaking point. My understanding is that the infrastructure is a lot better now, that if we had the same that was a 100-year incident, I believe.
It's a pretty rare incident.
Yeah, but we have the infrastructure now to.
We have a lot more batteries on storage,
Mm.
which have really made a big difference. And
So at the moment right now, I'm kind of curious about like, what if we do have another crazy heat wave, and like, I know that it's unpredictable, weather is unpredictable, but are we still in that moment? Because I know other people are obviously trying to get their own energy. Like, is the grid in, say, like, how likely, I guess the long story short, how likely are we to see, one of these?
I think much less, a couple of things have happened. A lot more resources have come online, including, like I said, battery storage. We've added significant, I think it's something like 8,000 megawatts of new storage capacity since then.
Great.
The state also created this thing called a strategic reliability reserve, where it brought in some ones through cooling units that were scheduled to shut down back online for the purpose of reliability only. And then third, the state has been revamping their reliability program, which is called resource adequacy. And so we're now under a new construct called slice of day, which started in 2025, which increased all of our obligations for resource adequacy. So we have more reliability products that we have to show as compliance.
Right.
And so, plus we have a really good hydro year this year as well. So all of those factors make it highly unlikely that we'll see another kind of event that we saw that weekend. But things can always
That's
change. So I'm not
true.
going to say
You never
never,
know,
but
but
it is not likely.
It sounds like a
The
lot.
state has done a lot of work since that
Sound-
happened.
Sounds like a lot of good news overall. What about obviously change in administration? If we go back to drill, baby, drill, which it sounds like for the next 2 to 4 years, that will, I'm assuming, have an effect on energy prices, domestic energy prices. Has there been any thoughts on that, and what that means for us?
There's a lot of uncertainty as to what the effect will be, because in addition to drill baby drill is export baby export.
Right, yeah, sure.
And so there's a lot of different ways that the market might move. I think without a lot of speculation into policy, I think it's important to consider, and Benna would probably be a great resource for this, but consider what actual policies get put in place, and not just the sound bites, because there's a lot of people involved in setting the policies. For example, at the same time that there's comments about pressure on renewables and not building wind and that sort of thing, there's demand for electricity for the AI growth, right? So some of it might be just noise, and the reality is all that AI growth, all of the efforts is going to be in all of the above sort of strategy for supply in all markets in the US.
I'll just add that those elements are in our risk register, and they don't really these are not big impacts that are on us financially, right? Financially, prices go up. Actually, right now we do very well, as you'll see this year's budget. The financial stress to exposures from prices coming down for the reasons we went through and Scott explained. But we do have that in our risk register, those scenarios, because they do affect our mission of decarbonization.
Yeah.
So we do, and then we appropriately look to see how much resources time. That's why Benna spends a lot of time on those policies, because of it. Because as an organization, we're looking at what impacts our mission, right? We want to achieve our mission. So it's there most often because it affects our decarbonization strategy.
Great. And I guess the last thing related to black swans potentially is economic catastrophe. Like, I'm sorry, I feel a little nervous every year that goes by where it's like, when's it going to happen? I know how this works in cycles, right? And the last time was 17-ish years ago now, almost 2 decades. So how is that taken into, like, the history of economic recessions? Is that taken into account when you're, trying to, I know how difficult it is to try and maybe impossible to predict black swan events, but
Right.
like the next oncoming economic catastrophe, is there any kind of science behind it or numbers behind it that you can hedge your bets a bit more, or, have more reserves for that kind of thing?
We do consider, qualitatively, we consider such an event happening, and then we look at what would the levels of prices and the impacts on our counterparties be, or ourselves be, under those scenarios, right? And as an organization not highly levered, right, we don't have some of the risks in a recession that, say, maybe a counterparty that's very levered up for their project or something is, and we have to worry more about what happens if a counterparty fails than ourselves,
I see.
right? So that all goes into the analysis around the reserves and what pressure do these events put on our reserves, and are the reserves adequate to weather those storms?
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the answers.
Yeah, I was wondering, I think it's a much smaller scale financially, but the risks associated with losing grants and that sort of thing is, are we, I mean, there's certainly, I would assume there are some grants we get to do electrification and education and some things like that. And then I was also wondering about grants that some of our, I guess you said counter products, or some of the projects that we are investing in are expecting to get some sort of subsidy from the government that may not come to pass. So that's part of what would be, we don't know yet.
We can talk a little bit about the electrification grants that we know that are at risk. And I don't think that's a significant impact on what we're talking about here today in terms of this huge stress. But in terms of the projects that we have under contract for power purchase agreements, most of them being solar and wind, which are available, both of them are able to get, those types of projects are able to get what's called the production tax credit or the investment tax credit from the federal government. And that's basically allows them to buy down the cost of equipment through a tax credit. And those tax credits have been in place for a long time, but they got reaffirmed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. As we understand it, it's part of what might be on the table. That is through that executive order, but we also understand that there's a low risk that those will go away because they're so popular in every state in the US. It's not just California building these types of projects. And we also understand that those projects that are already kind of in the queue or have done their procurement on equipment, those projects are okay as well. They're not at risk of losing the tax credits. And so, so we don't see that as being a large risk. I think the bigger kind of risk for our portfolios we talk about often is just these projects get delayed because they can't get interconnected. And so that when there's a delay, we have to go buy a replacement product for that, and that has an impact on us.
And those are things we do look at in the stress tests, is those projects and their timing and cancellation potential. I think there was one more question.
Yeah, thank you. I had two thoughts. One was when you're thinking about black swan events, it doesn't quite occur like a natural event, but a huge fire at Moss Landing. I mean, I realized this last summer there were no brownouts or blackouts because there's just been, I think, an order of magnitude increase in battery storage. But one, that could have been, well, it was catastrophic, but it could be catastrophic to the future of battery plants given all the pollution and what kind of decisions are going to be made going forward with where battery plants can be. I know there was another fire there again. I don't even know how that's impacted the backup capacity at that location, but that was one concern I had about how will the future of battery be impacted by, the right environmental concerns. And then the other, that was one question I had, and because who would have predicted a fire that couldn't have been put out, right? Because there were measures to do that. And does that mean that we want to limit how big a battery plant is? Would they be more dispersed? Would they be not in an ecologically sensitive area? Is Moss Landing at risk for that? The other is, we're all looking at the huge amount of housing that we're supposed to plan with our housing elements, and all of that housing should be all electric. mostly not because we can mandate no gas, because we're all getting undercut on that, but because California Building Code requires redundancy. If you do gas, you have to do electric as well. And most builders aren't going to want to spend double. Are we concerned about the federal government coming in? I mean, if he can say no paper straws and no water restricting heads because he can't get his hair clean with a low flow shower, will there be some federal undercutting of our requirements for making sure everything can be all electric? Has that been considered?
Well, I'll just mention a couple things, Monica, and then I was gonna hand it to you. So one thing is in the stress cases, I'm leaving the hard part to her. In the stress cases, the team has come up with a lot of different impacts to electrification, right? We might not highlight those as financial stresses, but they are things the team is thinking about to approach with mitigation and what do we do if, and are there other paths to get to our goal, even if there's disruption. And in fact, what you mentioned is on the list. It was brought up, I think, by Zoe on the team. So there's an awareness and consideration for that. Monica, I'm gonna defer to you on Moss Lane, but I believe we don't own it and it's by the sea, right? Or am I?
Yeah, both things. Yeah, so we're not a project participant or an off-taker of Moss Landing, but obviously that was a 300 megawatt battery that went offline, and that's capacity that's no longer available to the grid. So there'll be an impact to the grid associated with that. In terms of the bigger question, as far as like, what are we doing with batteries, and are batteries at risk in California that is developing new batteries? First of all, and we provided a summary about this to the board at the last board meeting, but the Moss Landing facility itself was a very unique facility. It was built back in 2015 prior to a whole bunch of safety standards being put in place for batteries. And it was a kind of a unique chemistry or chemical composition for the lithium ion battery that's not very common anymore. But the bigger kind of issue with that particular installation was that when it was built, it was all these batteries were put under one big building. And when they caught fire, the whole building kind of collapsed and created more fuel for the fire. That's why it was such a kind of catastrophic fire. Under new standards and new permits and new safety requirements, most of these batteries are built in a single kind of encasement. And so all the projects we have are built that way, so that if one battery catches fire, the rest of them can't catch fire. So you might lose one module, but you won't lose the whole project. And the standards continue to get better. The industry has learned quite a bit about how with the safety on these batteries. Just from a general risk management standpoint, we don't do large projects. We don't do like 500 megawatt storage projects. We diversify and we buy over time to get price diversification, to get counterparty diversification, to get locational diversification, because that matters from a portfolio perspective. So we don't have a big concentration under one place. So if one of our big projects burned, obviously we'd have to find a replacement product, but it's not like we would lose our whole portfolio.
Right,
And
yeah,
then-
it's interesting how that affected, like,
Yeah,
but the grid is interconnected.
Yeah,
And
but
I
we are
apologize
worried
for not
about
having
the
read the-
future of storage, because a lot of communities, rightfully so, are worried about having these cited in their communities. And so there's a legislation right now that's been introduced from one of the legislators in the Monterey area where Moss Landing's at, that puts a lot more control on the permitting of these back at the local level, because the state passed a bill a couple of years ago that put it at the state level. And so there's now going to be a battle over who gets to determine how these things and where they're sited and what restrictions are put on these batteries. So that'll inevitably cause prices to go up. There's just no doubt about that. And so we will face that as we get new projects, or try to get new projects online.
Thank you.
And then Zoe, I don't know if you wanted to, I don't know how much time we have, but Zoe, if you wanted to
Yeah, I
address.
think the quick answer is that we are monitoring things at a federal level. There's nothing that is out there immediate or obvious that would impact kind of local control. But of course, there are big things like DOE oversees efficiency standards at a national level and the Clean Air Act. And if there could be big moves there that could have an impact on the local level, we're kind of keeping an eye, but there's nothing immediately that we're aware of.
Right, because I mean, I know for electrification, most of our cities are relying on California Building Code now to at least, most developers aren't gonna want to dual plumb, so we'll achieve electrification that way.
Yeah.
And somebody decides to talk to the federal government and say, hey, we want to run gas, and they're making us do electric.
Right, if there is, right, because there's no longer kind of those subsidies in place that there used to be to help the gas extension. Which economically makes sense.
Yeah, a quick question. Yesterday's the work, the San Jose Mercury News published a map of fire hazard, fire prone areas. And there was some, I guess they've changed their, the way they figure this out, the calculations and so on. So for example, just Cupertino, which had something like 20 acres 10 years ago is now like 1,000 acres, and nothing really
very
has
high,
changed. I mean, the hills are the hills, and there hasn't been that much development or anything. So that is something we were quite rattled about and wondering how they came up with those numbers. So I just wanted to mention.
I don't know how that, but is that a risk that we actually, like, if there was catastrophic fires in our service territory, that would obviously impact our load? Have we modeled that as a stressor?
We have not, but it's gonna be rounding from a financial perspective because, the load loss is not gonna be that much. Our load is all throughout the area. But there could be disruptions, other
Yeah.
disruptions.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we should look at, just kind of think it through a little bit, what this
This just came out yesterday and everything.
Yeah, but I didn't read the article and I'm not aware how they came up with those fire zones. I imagine. No, it wasn't how they came up with them.
Yeah.
No, it's not proximity to transmission or infrastructure.
Yeah, I think it
had
talked
some
about
potential.
vegetation,
Yes.
historic fire risk. It was interesting, they do say what the factors were, and in some area, they divided out very high and moderate. And in a lot of cities, those areas grew. In other cities, things went from high to being divided down. But Cupertino's was like more than an order
I
of
think they
magnitude
mentioned
increase.
Maybe Zoe, we can kind of run that down and see what it looks like
And they
from
did
our members' perspective.
links to the whole report.
Yeah.
Saratoga, Monte Sereno,
Moscato's.
Las Gatas, of course. I think those are the
Yeah,
big.
yeah.
I don't think ours changed very
Ours was
much. Ours was
mentioned
always
because
pretty
we
high.
were- Yeah, ours was mentioned because we were from very small, we went.
Right, yeah.
But one last question. I was on the audit committee till last year, and the consultants talked about the risk-based scenarios as well as these stress tests. So is that connected with this? You guys do your own and they do their own? Is that how it works?
So that's a different, those are financial auditors. What they're doing in the audit is they're conducting a financial audit, saying that public, you can trust the financial statements. They didn't find any weaknesses, material weaknesses in our financial process procedures and what's in those statements. So that's a very financial audit. They don't do, like companies have internal audit, looking at all process procedures. There are financial auditors ensuring there's integrity in our financial statements.
Except this has sort of a budget impact.
Yeah, so this is comprehensive. This is looking at our entire mission and what could derail us in achieving that mission, as well as there are sometimes opportunities that come up. So as an organization, we cannot focus on everything all the time, right? There are risks that we need to mitigate. There's opportunities we need to capture to achieve our mission optimally. So this is called risk-based decision-making. They call risk-based auditing. Their focus is, they're looking at highest risk elements that can affect the integrity of the financial. We're talking about our entire operation here and our ability to achieve our mission.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One is, how do the scenarios change year to year? At least the top few should be similar or not the same.
Exactly, and that's why what Scott was saying, if you look at the financial stress test, it's still the same.
Correct.
Because when we did our first stress test in 2022, we did a whole bunch of scenarios. Prices collapse, prices increase. Prices increase, we were making a ton of money, you know. Like, okay, that's not a stress.
It's a good problem.
Yeah, and even economic load loss under certain scenarios are not financial stress tests, because if we have a financial stress test where we're talking prices collapse, if our operating margin becomes a negative, less load is actually better for us, because we're not losing money on it. So anyways, to answer your question, without getting too much into the weeds, yes, our financial stress test has been the same, because we know those are still the same exposure. Now, another element work that Scott's doing is looking at our hedging strategy. Part of the reason when prices come down, our revenues come down, but our power supply cost doesn't come down as much. It's because we have locked in hedges, right? But we know that there's a financial impact, the PCIA portfolio and the way we index our rates to PG&E. Those drivers of revenue are correlated to market prices, which are also correlated to our power supply costs. So there's an element of hedging that's built in. It's actually, PCIA is actually 100% hedge. Because it's what the commission basically said is this portion of the portfolio that was procured on behalf of your customers, even though you don't get physical rights to that, you have all the financial exposure to that, right? And that means that is a financial hedge to us. What we're doing is now we are accounting for that. We have to estimate, and there are some issues that we don't think we should be estimating, because the PUC should tell us what it is. And that's another work that we're doing on the PCIA front. Looking at making cases in front of the PUC to restructure that process so it's more fair to us. But coming back to the analysis, we're adjusting down our hedging so that some of this exposure should come down somewhat, but still overwhelmingly, it's still a price exposure, prices coming down. There are some instruments in our portfolio we cannot make adjustments for. This is not a liquid financial market that we can offload our long exposure. So to answer your question, yes, those scenarios stay the same, but we are also taking steps to the extent we can to reduce our risk exposure. And that's actually going to the executive committee where this Friday, where we are basically accounting for that and making adjustments to our energy risk management policy. So accounting for that will lessen some of the impact of the financial stress that we're describing, but it's not going to reduce this exposure that we have to market prices coming down.
I totally agree, but then our reserves are going up, right? That's a better.
Yeah, so that's what we've been doing, right? We have said we have this huge financial exposure. One of the graphs in the presentation was there was a graph in one of the slides that showed volatility of natural gas prices, which is very correlated to energy prices. And going back to the last disaster we lived through in the energy industry was the 2008 financial collapse, when basically oil prices went from like $100 a barrel and gas prices were way up there, $8 to $10, and then collapsed within a matter of like 3 months. And if that scenario were to occur, which is kind of what's similar to what we're modeling in the stress test, that would be very stressful for us right now. So we want to have reserves to build to that, and we have built reserves, as I'm going to go through in the next agenda item. Yeah. So anyways.
Okay. Then you mentioned about the opportunities. Any idea what happened to a few years, the opportunities we discovered of last year or the year before that?
Yeah, so the opportunities are, for example, we have to look for, like, PCIA is one thing I'll mention right now, right? So we're always constantly looking for opportunities. When PG&E last year went to the commission and says, commission, change the rules, it's gonna hurt us. the commission, so we basically stepped in and said, along with all the CCA communities, just because the outcome is not coming favorable, doesn't mean you change the rule in the middle of the game. Okay, so let's look at the rules. But also we are trying to convince our CCA community as an opportunity that this is also an opportunity for us now that they're opening the PCIA proceeding, right? We should really ask for what is really fair, and it helps us manage this financial risk. So that's an idea of an opportunity. We see that as an opportunity, so we want to make sure when we go to our budgeting resource allocation, we put enough staff time for that process. So we look at that, what impact that, the risk register, the risk rubric Scott went through, that rated high in the risk register, in the risk matrix, because it said financial impact, or the impact to our mission is high, probability of this occurring is high. So basically that's one example, and there are many such examples. There could be the last few years we're looking at the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, we're incorporating that in our decarb programs and effect. So there are opportunities like that. There is an organization. So risk register is never stagnant, even though we do a comprehensive risk. As an organization, we go through risk on a day-to-day basis, right?
Thank you. Those are the questions. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Scott.
Just note, currently we do not have any public comment for this item.
Yeah, it's just discussion, right? Okay. Moving on to the next agenda, mid-year update.
Okay. Okay, so I just went through in the previous item our budgeting process. So this is for the current fiscal year that started in October 1st of 2024. And we're doing the mid-year adjustment. And this is an action item. What we will be proposing to the board in May is an adjustment to the budget. We're asking that the committee review and recommend that the board adopt the recommended, what we're recommending here is the adjusted operating budget. I have the review of budget timeline, and I'm actually going to skip it because we just covered it in the previous agenda item, but we always included this deck. I'm going to highlight the changes in the budget since we last adjusted it in December. So we'll compare the two budgets. I'll talk about the 5-year reserve projections, and we're asking for additional staffing, 5 additional staffing, and I'll basically tee that up by saying, when we did the annual budget back in September, we were basically looking at some realignments within the organization. How can we set up ourselves more efficiently and effectively? We knew there were some gaps in our staffing from a long-term sustainability perspective, but we said because of the organization and fine-tuning we were doing, we said we were not able to ask for those. We will revisit them at the mid-year, and that's what we're doing. Since these slides were sent out to you 15 minutes before coming here, we've been doing some additional analysis. And so this is sort of an amended presentation. We're looking at alternative spending scenarios. We were not able to put in time. At the time, we had to put the budget, send out the budget. So we'll go through some, given our financial strength, given the way the year is shaping up, we're basically looking at some alternative funding, whether it's for customer rates, discounts, or whether it's our Clean Community Fund that we talked about at the last Finance Committee meeting and touch on it a little bit as well. And then we'll ask for your vote. We'll ask you to actually help pick an alternative that you support and then make a recommendation that the board adopt the budget with that alternative. Okay, so I just wanted to start off by giving the highlights, the punchline of the budget. We're gonna have an excellent year. We've had an excellent year last year. The excellent year is coming because prices have remained high. Energy prices actually started coming down even last year and the year before, but RPS, the renewable resource prices, and the resource adequacy, the capacity prices, that, it's another product that we have to buy. They went through the roof. So that actually has helped us because with those sustained prices, as we talked in the previous discussion, price increases help us because financially, in a financial equivalent position, we're what we'd call long. In other words, we have more resources than our load obligation. So when we have to dispose of them in the market, what we need beyond what we need to serve load, money. So be careful when I say how you interpret that. This is a financial representation, not a physical representation. Physically, we buy what we need to serve our load because of the way the PCIA mechanism works. We have that financial exposure. So from a financial perspective, it has the same impact as if we had owned them physically, even though we don't own them physically. Okay, so that's what's contributing to this margin. And this year, since we did the budget adjustment in December, prices have come down. So that's making this year even better. Instead of the 96.8 million we're projecting as net contribution to reserves, now we're forecasting 133 million if we are going not to increase any additional spending. Okay, so remember the previous discussion we said, not all of this money is in the bank. We will be giving this back next year because of the way the PCIA mechanism works, right? Because remember, PG&E sets the rate, CPUC sets the rate, but it's based on a forecast of energy prices and the forecast of what they call the market price benchmark. So they forecast those prices and then they true it up. We'll get a big insight into that true up when they publish the prices that they'll use to true it up in November, the market price benchmark that I talked about earlier. So what's happening now is that prices are coming down. So our bottom line is going down because our power portfolio cost is coming down, even though we're hedged, we're not 100% hedged going into the year, right? So whatever we didn't buy that we still have to buy now, we were able to buy at a lower cost than the prices we had projected in December budget. But what's happening on the PG&E front, in that balancing account for PCIA, right, market prices are coming down. Those PCIA portfolio are worth, value of the PCIA goes down. So they are saying next year they will say in December, we actually projected that prices were going to be high and we under collected PCIA from these CCA and other customers. So now we have an under collection. So rates PCIA, it's a double whammy, right? Prices next year's forecast for PCIA for the following year will be low. And then we've got this under collection from this year. And then the same thing is happening on the PG&E's rate side, just like our procurement cost is going because we're not 100% perfectly hedged. They're not 100% perfectly hedged. So their portfolio costs are going down, which means they're on their bundle customer, their customers, they're over collecting, they will refund to those customers next year. So their rates will come down, which means our margins will come down. So this is a very important phenomenon. This is what we model the stress test for. So when you look at 1 year, you cannot look at 1 year. You at least have to look at one other year because we, as I said, even though this year is good, some of this money we're gonna give back next year. If you look at next year, it's a huge negative year relative to what we had forecasted in December. And so the margins are weakening we're forecasting the next 2 fiscal years, we're gonna have a negative contribution to margin, and then very low margins remaining 5 year if the prices prevail that we think that we're forecasting. And when I say we're forecasting, we don't actually say, we don't have a big macroeconomic model or something like that. What we, in the financial traded instruments, these commodity for future delivery are traded in the marketplace. So if I want to buy prices for next year, I can go and purchase that right now and lock that in. That is a what we call a forward market price. So that gives us an insight as to what the willing market participants are willing to pay right now for that power for the future years. That's the best measure of what the market price is right now for that future delivery. We would call forward prices, and that's what we use. So those prices, as I said, go up and down, but it's based on market, what we're observing in the market. And feel free to interrupt. There are a lot of concepts in these, but they're very important in understanding our finances. So don't look at 133 and say, let's go shopping, spend things. Remember, some of this we're gonna give back next year. But we account for that in our financial forecast. That's why I look at 5 years out, actually. So as I said, revenues remain relatively unchanged. There were some ups and downs, but all in all, it came close to what we had forecasted in December. The key reason, as I already mentioned, that this year's budget is coming down. Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've heard in the news that Newsom is gonna ask for PG&E rates to be reduced by 30%. Well, that seems unlikely, but anyway, what would that do?
So it depends on what they're talking about, right? Remember, we provide generation services.
Right.
PG&E provides generation and transmission and distribution, and our customers still receive transmission distribution from PG&E. Over the last, as we've talked about in board study sessions on affordability, and Justin's going to talk more at the next board meeting about that, we've shown that the transmission and distribution has more than doubled in 10 years or so, right? That, with all the undergrounding, the fire mitigation risks. So it's not clear when they say what prices they will lock in. It will be very difficult, I would say, to lock in commodity prices. This is subject to market. What's happening in the marketplace? Last time they locked in commodity prices was during the energy crisis around 2001, when at that time, people didn't understand markets very well. They basically said, we're deregulating the energy industry, prices are gonna come down like they did in natural gas. So the expectation of prices were gonna come down. A lot of things happened and market prices went through the roof. The PUC kept utilities rate frozen. Utilities couldn't survive. You cannot, you have to pay what the market is.
The Enron crisis. Right?
Yeah, the Enron crisis.
And then there were other mechanisms of market manipulation in there. So there was a lot of elements, but one element was that market prices, natural gas prices went through the roof, right? It was a very cold winter and a lot of things were going on. And if the utility is not able to recover that, where's the money going to come from?
I think you might be referring to the governor's executive order, and so.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's all I know is the soundbite.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
there's a lot of kind of lofty goals in there with a little more detail that's going around. I know that we're gonna cover some of it in the affordability session in March. But just like one thing we're not clear on is when we've heard the same statements, we've heard things between 30 to 40%. When we hear PG&E say it, they say the whole energy bill, which includes gas as well, because PG&E is responsible for gas and so we're not exactly sure where that number 30 or 40% is coming, but it's unlikely, as Amrit mentioned, to impact the generation component. It's mostly on that other side of the bill and gas. And so, but I think it's one of the things that we're trying to understand ourselves. and what that would actually, like, can they actually achieve that without fundamentally changing their rate
Yeah,
structure?
it's very confusing.
Yeah.
It's very
But
confusing.
it's something that I think that he wants to put out there as a goal, and I think it's a good goal to have.
Without going into too many details, on generation service that PG&E provides, generally they recover at cost. They don't, when they buy PPAs like we buy.
Yeah.
Whatever cost is, that's the cost they charge to the customer. They're not allowed to mark that up. The only caveat to that is if they have their own generation, they're allowed to recover a rate of return on that. But for the most part, on energy generation piece, they don't technically make money on that service. Only assets that they own, which is dwindling because they're not building power plants, they get a authorized rate of return on the capital that they have invested in.
So the transfer somehow of money that people pay to support fire protection things, that's really seems to be what they're talking about. You know,
Well, that's just a cost of operating, right?
Yeah.
Because they've been ordered to underground and harden the grid,
Right,
right?
right.
And so that cost is labor and materials and infrastructure that they have to do, and so that becomes part of the rate base. So you pay for that in your rates right
So
now.
it's all included.
But they're talking about, there's some policy discussions about moving some of those cost components that are clearly policy, whether they're sort of climate goals or wildfire safety, away from ratepayers and onto taxpayers. So that's one way to fundamentally
Yeah.
shift some of the cost. So that's one of the things that's in the executive order that could have a significant impact. We're also looking at some of the other non-bypassable charges that are on PG&E's bill for policies for programs related to energy efficiency and public benefits and fairer discounts. They're looking about whether those are effective and should they sunset those or remove those as well. And that will have some impact, although not to the magnitude of 30 to 40%. That's more like a small fraction of what's there. So I know that you have a lot more to go, and we'll take these questions and make sure that I think we should, these are all good, and we're gonna incorporate this in when we talk about affordability next month with the board.
Right.
We have a whole session on affordability, a round two, especially now that we have this executive order and we're trying to understand what that means for us.
Yeah, but so this power supply cost is same as power generation cost, right? Okay.
Yeah,
It's the terminal.
I call it, what do you call it, power supply? Yeah,
So
it
we
basically,
saved about 40 million, that's what it
Because-
means here, right?
because this is a forecast. What we're saying is to serve our load, the energy that we have to buy, we already have energy that our purchase agreements that we bought, but we don't have 100% procured or locked in or hedged. And that's called open position, right? Something that we have to buy in the market. Either we're buying now, but now we're buying at lower prices because these forward prices come down, or even if it settles at California by ISO on the day ahead market, the spot market, those forecasters have come down. So basically, the cost of the remaining portion that we haven't locked in is coming down because energy prices coming down. Okay, the other thing is operating expense. I kind of already teed this up. We're asking for 5 additional positions again, and I'll go into details of it. As I said, last time we were reorganizing and realigning and we had said we would do this at the mid-year, and that's what we're doing. And then there are some additional minor increases in other areas that we'll talk about. And the other big picture item is the forward look, the 5-year look. Prices are coming down, and for the reasons we just talked about, that means our revenues will come down. And it's putting us in some of the stress tests that we've been talking about is kind of materializing, right? We're seeing that. But the other perspective to remember is from a customer perspective, right? This year our revenues are good, but it also means that customer rates are higher. And it's similar to last year, they're comparable to the level they were at last year. But when I talk about our financial projections, our revenues are coming down. It's also because customer rates will come down. The good thing from a customer perspective, not from a financial operating perspective, is that the bill pressure that some of the customers are facing if this projection prevails that we're seeing in the market, then the customer bills would come down. Okay, so there's a walkthrough of the table between the high level of the elements. As you can see, main story there is power supply costs. Is again, the prices are coming down. And one other element I did mention, do it in the next slide now.
So here negative means good.
Negative for this year, but again, remember that when I talked about some of this will be given back next year because of what's happening on the PCI and PG&E side. So power supply costs, the other reason, main reason is prices are coming down. And this was talked about at the board many times by Monica and Chris, head of our power procurement. Starting this year, California implemented a new resource adequacy market. In the past, they used to basically look at, in a more simple way of meeting our requirements. We had a monthly target, and we had complied with year ahead and the month ahead targets. Now they're saying as the grid, as there's more intermittent resources coming on the grid, we want to plan for the capacity so they don't have those brownout scenarios, so they can have sufficient reserves so we don't have those rolling blackouts like we had a few years back. What they're saying is they're going to look at it on an hourly basis. So instead of a 1 monthly requirement, we have a 24-hour requirement, what we also call slice of day requirement. So when this marketplace, when we were doing our planning and analysis, we said, we will probably need a lot more RE resources. So we had kind of put that in our power supply cost projections. Now with the way the market is shaped out, it's actually working better than we had expected. Some of the higher level requirements that we had in the budget, we have reduced. That's another reason that the cost is coming down beyond just market prices coming down. This is a detailed view of the major cost categories of the changes. Again, the big story is the power supply expense. So this is a reserve projection. There's two bars that we're showing. The higher one basically says, as you know, we set aside money for programs. We set aside money. The board set aside money for certain initiatives, such as purchasing and building. And when we do our the financial statements that come out and the treasurer's report that come out every month, basically says, if we haven't spent it from a GAAP perspective, it's not an expense, right? But we have year-round funds. So when we're looking at our building our operating reserves, we have to take into account that we have something like 100 million or so that we are allocated and will be spending. That's showing up in that big higher number. And we like to show the higher number because we want counterparties to know that we have that cash, and we are rating agencies to know, because if anything bad were to happen, the board always have the ability to say, stop the earmark funds, we will recapture. So it is a measure of liquidity that you do want to display. But for our purpose, look at the darker shade of blue there. That's the target. That's the comparison to our target. And I'm pleased to say that we're projecting on a basis to be above target over a 5-year period, even with the declining prices that we're seeing. But this is without taking into account any additional expenditure. All right, let me cover staffing. So as I mentioned, we were delaying this for the mid-year because of the fine-tuning we were doing at the organizational level. What I will say is, and Monica can chime in, is that we have done a good job in filling our key critical positions. But as in a healthy organization, you can just say fill key positions, and you have to have bench strength. You have to have people at different levels at the right level. And we have been a growth organization, right? We're building capabilities in since we started. So now there are resources, the type of resource, employees we're looking at, in a lot of these areas are entry level. Because what we need is, as people get trained and skilled, they need to move to a higher level. And what that does is basically enables us to cut back some of the services we seek externally. And some of these are in key areas, like portfolio modeling, like Scott was doing when he was part of Ascend. We're building more and more of that capability in-house, and it makes sense because it's a key critical function. It's very different when a consultant does an analysis and moves on to another client, because this is key understanding of our portfolio. It's an institutional knowledge that we need to retain and we need to build on. And the same goes for if a key position leaves, we need the bench strength there. So that's what our focus with the SVCE 3.0 is. And that is a sort of flavor of what we're asking in these resources. So the 5 resources, there's 2 in the Justin's area of customer success. 1 is for energy lead. There are a lot of programs that we're targeting and that we have compliance obligations for, where we're looking at how customers can flex their demand in programs that we can design on that side. So the 1 position is targeted for that. And the second position is, the state provides funding for energy efficiencies. It's collected in customer rates. And we can ask the commission that we want some of that funding. And there are a whole bunch of requirements. If you source that funding, then we can then target more specifically energy efficiency measures for our community that we have a better understanding for. That's the other position. And then we have a position in the regulatory area. And this is in the resource planning. We put together integrated resource planning. This is again to bring some of those outside portfolio managing skill sets in-house, so that we gain that understanding and can build on capabilities going forward. We're looking for 1 area in the finance and admin, and this is in Scott's area in data analysts. What we've done, we have, as part of the reorg that Monica launched, that I said we were doing at the time of the annual budget, we have consolidated all our data and analytics functions. But right now, our data is still spread out. We implemented the BPO, which is centered on our energy procurement portfolio management. We have the DAISY platform that supports a lot of our customer insights that we use in our programs. And then we have other data that various spreadsheets we're consolidating. We need people at a lower level to free up the resources that have now gained that higher level understanding to move to some of those higher data modeling and integration need. And we will be hiring also an external vendor to help with this. But we need a resource to free the experienced staff to work with them. But we need entry level so that they're in training and they can start to do a high level role, but they can take some of the lower level jobs that some of the other analysts will be leaving behind as they move through the functions. And then in the power procurement area, we're looking for a rotational type of analyst that can cover all segments of the power portfolio. Middle is actually in finance, but when you rotate a person in this function, they gain that insight. What do you need to do when you manage a portfolio trading side? What do you need to do? You need to have an understanding of portfolio risk management. Even when you're in trading, you need to know how the KISA market works. So we're thinking hiring an analyst that goes through, rotates, they develop their skill sets, provide that key skill sets in key areas. And again, it also enables us to bring some of the key functions we've outsourced in-house. So that's, even though 5 sounds a lot, but it's really critical that we build that bench strength and we don't run the organization too lean. So that's what this is. there any questions or any?
You covered it very well.
A little bit of people reserves is what I'm.
It's not really so much reserves, there's that need right now even, but if key person leave right now, would be, a lot of.
Being prepared for the
Yeah.
potential of, I get.
And then, yeah,
I was gonna say also that, there's an inverse relationship between when tech is losing jobs and when government is gaining jobs. So we have an opportunity right now to do great recruitment, and we should take advantage of it, so I'm really pleased to see this.
yeah, and then the way I look at it, instead of outsourcing, bringing it in-house,
Yes.
might be more efficient, right, cost-wise,
It
and
is
then
efficient,
domain
it is-
knowledge and all those kinds of things.
It is cost effective, and again, as I said, we maintain that knowledge inside. And we've structured some of the, like the Ascend contract that we took to the board. We've have budgeted like consulting hours. If we don't use, we get the money back. And we're trying to bring a lot of those services in-house, so because again, they're key to our business.
Another big element of this too is that, our strategic focus area number 5 that the board approved is all about making sure that we retain, that we attract and we train and we build a vibrant culture for employees here. Every single employee in this organization works really hard, super hard, works more hours than, that they probably should. And so part of this too is making sure that we don't get into a burnout phase
Yeah.
and lose critical employees too. So we need to build that bench as well.
Yes, I received an analysis, 1 AM providers, today's meeting.
Did we add any positions this current year? Or last?
No, as I said, when we were doing the annual budget in September, we said we will come back. We do need positions, but we were doing reorganizations. How do we structurally get the most out of everyone in the organization? We said we will come back in mid-year when we've done that. That's what we're doing. So we did not add any position.
These numbers are beginning to look familiar, so I'm assuming you brought it up, but you didn't act on it?
No, we did not do any staffing in the September budget or at the December. We said we will do this in the mid-year. Maybe remembering the
Prior year.
the fiscal year 23-24.
When we added.
Yeah, the slide templates is consistent. That's what you're remembering.
Yeah, I think it's important, as the organization matures and you figure out, all right, there's certain things that you outsource because you don't use it very often, but if there's a skill set that you need in-house, it's more important to have that. I think it's really important to be able to have career paths for people. And so to have that level and then just retain institutional knowledge. And I agree, this is a really good time to be hiring. Frankly, government is going to be losing employees as well at the federal level. So there are people looking for jobs. This is a great place to come. And, I look at this with our town employees. You don't want people running so lean that they're burned out. You also don't want it to be catastrophic if you lose somebody. So, I feel like knowing what type of work has been going on and wanting to bring things in-house makes it more robust, gives you that ability to cross-collaborate and make sure that all of your departments are working together, which works better than bringing in an outsider when you know you need that skill set in-house now.
Exactly, yeah. So now the 1 AM analysis, the additional spending alternatives. So we're basically looking, we've had a good fiscal year. We've had a good fiscal year last year and even the year before. In my time, there was 1 year when we lost money and we still maintain a customer discount. So it's important for us to maintain a customer discount because we want to be competitive. And a reminder that 2/3 of our load is CNI, commercial industrial load. So as we're looking at future years, we know that we're in the base case scenario, we're projected to exceed our target days of cash on hand reserves that are designed to withstand the risky scenarios that Scott talked about earlier, right? And then it's very fine print there. I can't even read it from here, but you'll see that next year's rates, what's baked into the projection that's driving the negative bottom line for next year is that actually the customer rate will come down something like 30 some odd %, right?
1.2%.
So there's less of a need next year to provide a bigger discount. Last year, when we took the budget to the board said, let's set aside some funds for 4% for at least two forward fiscal years. And that's what we model in the base case and then 1% thereafter. We think it makes more sense to provide the discount now when the rates are higher, customer rates are higher, and consider a lower discount next year if the rates are already coming at 30% from a customer bill perspective. Right? That may make more sense. So next year we can give a 1% discount and still remain competitive. But again, this is probably a year that we could give a better discount, which again aligns with better with what our customers are facing. So that's just an alternative that we're putting forward. These are not baked into the budget projections, and but Finance Committee recommends then we incorporate them. And the alternative is to put it in the Clean Community Fund. If you remember the last Finance Committee meeting and then the December board meeting, Zoe went through a Clean Community Fund. And what the Clean Community Fund is basically, we're looking for years when we make, we have good financial years, and we look to the future and said we have adequate reserves. We're looking for opportunities to take that money and put it strategically so we can meet our mission, And within the clean community funds, we had talked about set aside for customer rate relief, set aside for additional decarb programs, and also looking at clean tech, generation technology locally and sort of customer side as well. But so that's an alternative that the committee can consider. Our recommendation is number one, because with the clean community, even though we're setting money aside for customer rate relief, it's for future years. Given the projections, this is the year customers are feeling the higher rates, and if that projection prevails, future years their bills will be coming down, right? And if the bills and if those rates do go up, then our financial projection will improve too. So we would be happy if, but those are we'll be happy supporting staff. We'll be happy recommending alternative one. But those are the alternatives we wanted to bring to the committee to consider.
And we'll take the direction and actually create the actual proposal. This right now we just want direction.
And there could be hybrid also, partly this.
So what you direct us, we will then bake it into the budget. We'll take that to the board at the March 12th meeting.
Well, I was wondering about, in the direct $35 million to the Clean Community Fund, would that be putting it in the fund or actually expending it immediately? It would just be putting it in the fund, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what Pat said. We have separate reserve funds, right? You have like a rainy day fund and there are other reserves. So this would be an additional reserve fund?
So we have an operating fund that we call the target 350 days. So that's you can call that rainy day fund. That's the fund that we basically look at the stress test and say, how much do we need to withstand the credible extreme, but the scenarios that can prevail in our industry. So that's what that fund is. Then we have set aside what we call earmark funds. Board says, spend this much money on programs, a building fund, on e-elect discount rate, and also the CRCR fund, smart relief, something I forget now. And so the Clean Community would be such fund that we would set aside, but we would not be spending it right now. But the customer relief, if we go with alternative one, obviously that that would be, we will again set it as a, you can think of it as a hitting our, because there's a distinction between fiscal year and calendar year. We will be targeting the discount for the calendar year. So some of this will come out from next year's budget, but we will take it out and carve it out for rate discount for this year.
Just a quick question. That is if we pick the second alternate.
First alternate is calendar year.
Yeah.
First alternative, we will implement a new rate adjustment. So we just implement a rate in January, we can implement a new rate probably in April.
Right.
Start with a 10% discount. And we propose it would be to continue to end of December.
And that'll cost you 35 million.
It's approximately 35, it'll be probably slightly less because unless you go on a true up for January through April, but
It's
but number 35 million looks from January through December, but if we just, the reality is gonna be from April, so these are rounded numbers.
And the Clean Community Fund doesn't exist yet, so next month we'll take it.
Creating a new.
Yeah, so next month we'll take it to the board. The concept was brought to the board, to the executive committee and to the finance committee. And so all the boards agreed on the concept of it. And then next month we'll bring it back to the board for them to actually officially establish that fund. It'll have $0 in it. But one thing we could do is just allocate this $35 million off the bat to that fund to be used in the future, not now. So we either give customers some relief now, or we put some money aside for the future.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning toward giving the customers the relief right now. I mean, bills are going up. I'm hearing all the time from constituents about water bill, energy bill, et cetera. And I think to the extent that people can see some real relief right now, I realize that it sounds like a future discount would not be this high, but they all build on each other, right? So every increase compounds. This decrease, even if future decreases aren't as high or discounts aren't as high, this is a big chunk. 10% is huge. And I think that would, really help a lot of customers.
Well, my question is, how much does this change the average person's bill? Because not.
That's true. It's not a 10% decrease, it's 10% of our part.
Yeah. So what would that be?
So I know I just bringing up those numbers for
$7.86 a month.
for residential.
For residential.
Non-care,
Out of
we
a
have-
many $100s.
Yeah.
Not quite $100 a year.
And
$80.
that's why the 4% really made no difference the last couple of years.
It's about $3, that's 20 cents. Yeah, but these are for residential. One thing you do remember is our very low income customers. And these are very low income by definition, what we call care fairer customers that meet those definitions. We give them substantial discount. 30 some odd percent on our end as opposed to 4% that we give to every customer. And they also get a huge discount at the T&D portion that all customers fund. So their rate is more than 50% lower than that of an average residential customer. And then their usage tends to be lower than the average residential customer. So the bill is more than 50% lower than.
That's good to know.
Yeah, so I also, when I saw the 10%, I mean, that number, it sounds huge, like 10%. Well, that's a big number. So I just immediately liked seeing that. And I thought that maybe that's where my question comes in. If we do go that route, is there gonna be any kind of like PR type thing to really, like, not just within the bill, not allow the customers to have to discover it themselves, but really kind of push, hey, look what we're doing for
I
you,
want some
look how
credit."
great, yeah, absolutely. And that, just to remind them, like, this might be an also every once in a while opportunity to really use that big discount there, even if it doesn't customers get about $100 a year kickback, but
We talked a little bit about whether we should offer it as a rate discount
Uh-huh.
or as a kind of a rebate.
ah,
A rebate having a different kind of marketing.
with a
message.
very big SVCE logo.
Something
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And may feel more significant if it's a
Sure.
one-time thing than if they just get it
I
every
can
month.
see that.
And those,
yeah.
those are things that obviously we take those options to the board and get their approval on something. But yes, you're right that, you're right too, that it's not like it's going to solve the affordability crisis. It's not gonna do that.
Right.
But it's just, it's perhaps the prudent and right thing to do for this organization, given where we are financially.
Sure.
For commercial customers, it's more noticeable. See,
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
For large commercial, average saving probably like 2,276.
Nice. Take it off the books.
A month.
Yeah.
What about the idea of putting 5 million into the clean community fund?
Yeah,
So we could say there's, we're making a real contribution to it and using the rest for discounts. I mean,
Yeah.
what would that be, an 8% discount? Would that, and I love the idea of a rebate. I mean, if you can get a rebate that's on the order of $100 for people, that's like, oh, we got $100. Somehow if it's, we don't want it to be too low.
How much does it cost to issue a rebate versus reduced rates though?
That's a good question, I have no idea.
How much over?
What's the bill credit number that we paid
The bill credit number
for?
for residential.
If we, instead of a discount, we gave it as bill credit, you have that.
Residential, $8
So 28, but that's two, so
semi-annual.
semi-annual, or we can do one big one, right?
So basically rebate of $50 or $100 over the year or something like that.
$56 a year.
Yeah, that looks substantial rather than $5 a month, which is nice, right?
We can
Literally.
do that, yeah.
And then I like the hybrid, put something into the fund.
And Amr, can you just clarify, so assuming that the board adopts the Clean Community Fund in March, when we go through the fiscal year 25-26 budget process, at that point, we'll identify again if there's any dollars that we can put in. That's how conceptually the mechanics of that fund works. That he would identify, given our position, if there's additional funds or not that we could put in that fund. So that even if we only put 5 million, that doesn't mean that that's what it's gonna be. There's gonna be another opportunity to look at this.
But it's just the idea that we're starting.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly,
something in.
exactly.
I
It's
like
not
that.
just a zero balance account, it
I
has
mean,
some
it could
money.
be another amount, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Can I say something more? So it's like all our funds that we have actually generate investment income.
Correct.
So $35 million would actually generate around 1.6 million a year
Good to know.
in interest income.
Interest rates are right.
So the more people in,
That's the good news we have.
Keep that in mind.
just let it sit there for a while.
Yeah,
It's nice to have some kind of
That's right.
discount.
Yeah, but that wouldn't mean much to the consumer.
Right.
Right, that's why I prefer giving some rebate, which looks bigger and then.
I'm actually okay if we don't fund the Clean Community this fund, because as I said, we will revisit this next year. $5 million by putting it there is not gonna do anything right now. And just the general, I think everyone should know, we are not gonna solve affordability with our discounts. That's, affordability is policy level decisions that are being made. Justin's gonna go into detail, but I'm giving you my opinion. And what, the happening on the T&D side, right? We buy power on the marketplace. We do a better job than PG&E, and we have some access to some opportunities like prepays, where we can take advantage of our tax exempt status to lower our costs. So we are able to provide discounts to our customer on a continued basis. But we cannot give big discounts that's gonna make a notice big. But 10%, as I said, you look at our financial reserves, they look big. And people are saying, why do you need that? So I think it's kind of, we gotta balance a little, okay, this is a year we're making good money. We're, we can afford to give back more to the customers. We do wanna know that we cannot solve the affordability problem. We do have big mission here, and that's what the Clean Community Fund accounts for. But 5 million right now is not gonna get us going in there. And we can look at it the next fiscal year.
So any ideas?
I guess I have a question then. I mean, if people seem to favor the 10% discount, but want it to come in different ways, like rebate versus regular discount, what does that mean for staff time? I mean, if you issue a rebate, is that a lot of paperwork and overhead versus a discount on the rate? Or I don't know what that looks like or
There's some
means.
complication. Meredith and I were just talking about this in the meeting. Because we have different customers on different rates, right? If I were doing it for one customer class, like we do bill credits right now for low income customers, like $17.50 for this year that we're putting into the budget, right? But that's one customer. We basically look at number of Carefare customers, and we take the pot of dollars and we divide it. But here, different people have different usage. Bill credit, how do we design that, right? Someone's usage will be higher, someone's usage will be lower. So there is some complexity. Each rate class is different. We would have to run it through our billing system with Calpine, the vendor. But there is complexity in that, because if you give a rate discount, then it's proportional. But if you use more, you get more.
But it's 10% off whatever rate you're paying.
Yeah.
I mean, there could be like just a bunch of PR around that, an insert or something that says, you're saying, 10% discount this year or something. I realize that it's gonna for some customers not look like a lot each month. But when you're constantly facing rate increases, a decrease.
It's a good message.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we would work with our marketing communications team to kind of think through what feels like the most compelling way to sort of share some of this. So I mean, based obviously on the direction kind of input from you all, but those are the things we would be considering, because yes, there are some logistical challenges or different ways we can do this, but at the end of the day, there's also different values we could get out of it. So we would think about both.
But in terms of meeting our mission, we need to electrify just a plethora of buildings. I mean, many, many buildings, and it's gonna take a long time. So, I mean, I think that, the movement that we make in that arena is huge. And from a psychological point of view, those rebates, everybody talks about the rebates they get when they do a big project. I mean, it's one of those things when neighbors get together, comes up. And so I think that has really big PR value as well. I'm not sure which is which. I could go either way, but I
think it's fundamentally, we want to get a better sense of whether you're okay with returning some money.
Yeah.
And if you're.
We're looking at one or two, and then how does one get implemented? That's up to
Yeah, we'll bring
the
that back
board,
to
a
the
larger discussion.
Yeah, it seemed like between now and the meeting, you would have time to work with Pine or the company to find out, what are the problems or pitfalls with various ways to do it.
And we'll get input from the executive committee as well on, no, it's not going, sorry.
So
You're in.
I think the general consensus is number one, right? And then how it should be implemented. I like what you said, it should be proportional to the usage instead of everybody gets the baseline.
Yeah, because we would still want to say a marketing slogan that we're giving 10% back.
Correct.
Yeah.
We also want it in our history, with that that number doesn't get lost. But then some customers will get less, because we'll design it on an average customer for each rate, each tariffs. Some will get less, some will get more. So there's.
Right. And then I like 10%, it's good number instead of 2% or 5% or something like If everybody is okay,
I
I
am.
think number one seems to be the choice here.
And number two can be revisited, it sounds like
It will be,
easily, oh, it will be for sure,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Because that's our overall plan.
Good.
And we have enough money to carry out our programs in the clean energy part for the next year. I guess that's the other thing. There's no problem that it's gonna slow down or anything. This money is.
We are great, I appreciate you asking it, because of course, you know, I love the programs, and so we are at the phase right now of continuing to ramp up what we're doing, so we have budget for the coming couple of years at least to keep scaling up what we're
That's what I
doing.
wanted to know.
The Clean Community Fund, part of its goal is to also look at the subsequent 3 years where there might be rules pushing for more water heaters, you know, things that are gonna be out there. How do we also make sure that we have enough resources at that point? But at least in the near term part of your question, no, it's not that doing this is going to slow down what we're doing. We're more constrained by interest and kind of driving that through our
Right, that's
programs.
what I thought, yeah, okay, thank you.
Did you need a motion or were you just looking for
We're
feedback?
gonna go, I have the clicker.
Last slide is the
So this is summary. I'm not gonna
bad
go
slide, right?
So yeah, once you let the
Water
$35 million go, it's not coming back, so just remember that.
It's a new store.
I just go to the recommendation here, because the summary slides, we covered it well. So we ask that you recommend the board adopt this, and now with the adjustment, the 10% discount, and we will compute in detail what that cost us. I propose we just keep it from April through December. We gave you a
Yeah.
35 million rough number, but we'll come up with a precise number and we'll model it. And then we'll take that to the board.
And then that way, April, you can do some PR also, you can
Okay.
backtrack and say. Okay, with that, any questions or if not, motion?
Happily make the motion, staff recommendations, which was, item number 5, what is it, right there.
Right there.
Recommend that the board of directors adopt a proposed mid-year 2024-25 adjusted operating budget with adjustments for any additional funding scenario the committee recommends, which we are recommending the
10%.
first, the 10% customer discount rate.
Second,
Aye.
okay,
Aye.
Are we doing the vote?
and she will.
No, I can call the question. I will confirm that there is no public comment on this item.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
you're usually the one
Sorry.
And
I missed that.
And with
Close
that,
the public-
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions, and that motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Next
All right,
item.
thank you. We have another item, I forgot.
Oh my God, you have to go through this one really fast.
Yeah.
This will be fast because we
Next
went-
item is recommend,
Okay, 3 minutes.
establish a rate stabilization fund.
All right, so if you remember, for those of you in the committee, last time we met was in November. I presented this as the exact same proposal, but we wanted your feedback and we had full support for it. So now, the reason I'm bringing it back is we need board approval. So now I'm seeking your, it's an action item because I'm asking for your, that you recommend that the board adopt a rate stabilization following GASB 62, and I'll go through a quick reminder of what this is. So rate stabilization fund it's allowed under GASB, which is the Government Accounting Standards Board, and this is the board that basically sets up the accounting principles, generally accepted accounting principles for governmental entities, which is such as SVCE. What this says is basically we can defer revenues. So years in which we have good revenues, we can defer it. And this is only an accounting, this is not budget, this is not actual financials. This is how we report on financial statements, right? So we can defer revenues good years and we can recognize them in later years. And the intent there is to basically, when the board directs funding for certain things, the expenditure of the can take time. And such as our programs and such as when we go by building, we set aside money. It'd be good in that financial year, we were to also defer it in our financial statements so that in years when that hits our financial statements, the GAAP rules, we basically recognize that expense in the accounting. We can also then basically recognize the revenues that the board had actually set aside on the project. And that's what this is all about. It's about the financial picture. Other CCAs are doing this. Here's an example from MCE's financial statement. You can see that they deferred in the year in which you defer, the highlight box there, the rate stabilization, you basically reduce your revenues, so your net position for that year goes down. And it shows up as a liability on the balance sheet. And your net position on the balance sheet goes down. But the year in which you reverse that, in the year in which you recognize that revenue, you basically your net position will go up, and then the liability on the balance sheet will come down. Okay, so this, again, doesn't affect, this is not any additional expenditure. This is just the way information appears on our financial statements. So the question is, well, what's the impact on our readers of financial statements, right? And we see three main constituents: the public, the credit rating agencies, and the counterparties that we do business with, and namely our energy suppliers, right? They basically look at our financial creditworthiness because they want to know that we can stand behind the commitments that we make on our power purchase agreements. In other words, what's the credit risk to them? So these are the people who look at it. We think overall assessment is positive from this change because it aligns expenditure, revenue recognition to the period when we incur the expenditure. Because right now we have something like more than 100 million set aside for earmark funds. When you look at our financial statement, you look at our net position, you're like, okay, what are they using all this money for? They don't have that picture. The board has already set aside this money that we plan to use for projects that are in play right now, or will be in play. So again, this is the distinction. This is not the reserves we talked about, the 350 days of cash on hand. This is different. That's actual finances, that's budgeting. This is GAAP. This is following what using the accounting principles as to how we will recognize or defer revenues and the way it's represented on our financial statements. This is the criteria, and for us to adopt this per the GASB rules, the board needs to basically adopt this, have to approve this. We'll be submitting at least a resolution to the board to adopt this. Our criteria, we're asking for some level of flexibility that we work with our accountant. And the criteria that we're proposing is to defer revenues such that we do not exceed the amount of earmarked funds. So the funds that the board has set aside for projects that are in play that are not hitting the financial statements because we haven't spent the money. So we don't want to exceed that, but we also don't want our net position to fall below. We don't want to, like this year, I don't want to take 133 million and just up against rate stabilization and show a negative net position. And we're saying at least show some positive revenues, net position, net revenues. So we propose a criteria of 2%. This is sort of following what some of the other CCAs have done. They don't actually, we have constrained it a little bit more in the sense that we are only doing it for deferred earmark funds. Other CCAs are not doing that. They're just saying, when we have good years, we'll just set it aside and call it a rainy day fund. But we are specifically defining, we have specific ways in which we define our operating criteria, like we base it on stress testing, that's sort of our rainy day operating fund. This is to say, we have, these monies were set aside, things that are in play but we haven't spent the money yet. Because the customers haven't claimed their rebates, for example.
So is this sort of analogous to, in city funding, we put things that we're gonna use in capital,
CIP funds, yeah.
CIP funds in a different place? And they put it there in reserves and we call on those reserves when we need them, but they're in reserves sometimes for decades before you get to the project. Is this kind of
It's
thing?
very similar, but this will be in the financial statements.
Okay.
So we can still keep money in the operating reserves. Instead of 350 days of cash on hand, we can keep growing that, like we were showing with the bars, right? Zero projections. But when a reader looks at a financial statement, they can say, SVCE, you're sitting on 500 million worth of cash. They don't get the picture that we've already earmarked 100 million
Right,
for
okay.
something.
Well, I guess my personal concern is that of transparency. We're a government agency and we're supposed to be transparent and honest. And when you showed the 3 groups of people that read these, public, I don't know anybody in the public that just, gets their funnies out of reading financial statements. I'm sure there are such people, but.
Oh God, Los Gatos is full of them.
Are they? Well, anyway, I don't know too many. And those people might not necessarily understand, it might not be transparent to them. But certainly the credit rating agencies and the counterparties, they're all gonna understand this. So it's not a transparency issue at all for them. So so that's the only concern I have. It's not.
Yeah, I think for someone who's not deep into these things, like your residents, this does look like a sort of an accounting sleight of hand. I don't want to use the word trickery, but it is a manipulation or.
So this would not be.
It's pretty common.
It is, and it's allowable. I'm not
it's
disputing
common
that at
legal,
all.
yeah.
And, right, and it's allowable, all the other have done it. But just from our perspective, does it make sense? I mean, it'll reduce our revenues, right, at least.
So yeah, in the private sector, SEC would not allow this. You're manipulating your financial statements, you're moving revenues around. But in government entities, we have this rule, the SVCE, that specifically allows it. And the reason for that, and they call it rate stabilization, is because they know that when you commit to let's say building a big power plant, right? You can take money out and set it aside for that. And then when we incur the expense of building a power plant, you can recognize it. In our case, we're not building power plants, but we are setting aside money for programs. We are setting aside money, in this case, for building fund, which we will recognize now that this year we incurred it. But initially we were thinking we were going to do that like 4 or 5 years down the road. So this is definitely allowed under the GASB 6 rules, it's GASB 62 rules. So and we are not saying we're just going to take any money and put it aside. We're putting, like other CCAs, they have not added this additional layer of constraint that we will only do so to the extent we have earmarked funds. Because I want to have clear distinctions between our operating reserves. As we've said, we need those operating reserves based on the stress test analysis, those prudent of reserves that we need to keep. This is because of money we have set aside, the board has set aside. So for funds, but in the financial statement, they don't show up. This way, there's the liability on the balance sheet that says, okay, the board has committed funding for certain activities that's accounted for.
So even without this, we could have something called encumbered funds or encumbrances, or even with, we do this often in government, right? We have a project coming up, we set aside money. We just don't use this mechanism, I guess.
Yeah, this is again, the impact is just on the financial statement. So if someone were to look at our net position right now and say 500 million, there's nothing in there other than what I put in the management section that, you know, where we have some discretion as to write, where we said, you know, we have set aside like 100-some-odd million towards programs and other uses of fund. But this would show it on the balance sheet to show that we have that money set aside.
So it will reduce our reserves when we show it, right?
It will reduce in the financial statement picture.
Whatever the DCOH, right?
So if you look at, you know, if they've set aside deferred inflows of resources, so they've set aside 70 million. Had they not done that, that 70 million would be, that 400, whatever that number is, would be 70 million higher.
You're right, okay.
Yeah,
That's
so, but again, it's nothing affecting on our.
Why do, yeah, you mentioned rate stabilization fund. Why do they, in our case, it's not.
We're not, yeah, this is an accounting term, so that we will have to use this terminology. It's a GASB rule. But the reason they said it is because you're setting aside money, they're saying, for like building a power plant. And usually people use it for like bond covenants. That's why initially when we looked at this a few years ago, we said, no, we're not going to do it. But now that our programs and other funds are growing, we think this is probably a good way to show that depiction. Again, we're not saying we're just going to put any amount of money in here. Other CCAs have that flexibility. They're saying, you know, when we make more money, we can do this accounting. We're saying we just want to recognize the commitment the board has made. It's not incurred expense here, but it's deferred expense. Board is deferring revenues so that the timing of the two go together.
Any questions?
No more questions.
One question I have is when we look at the March board meeting, we have too many agenda items. Given this is kind of an accounting rule and very technical, would the finance committee be willing to agree that we place this in as a consent calendar? And take the board time and discussion. We have quite a few agenda items.
I think so, and then just see if anybody, hopefully no one will pull it, but I mean, I think this is.
Yeah, if they have some questions, they will.
Yeah, they
pull
can
it.
always put it.
Yeah, and I'm also gonna take this, to explain this to the audit committee Friday. We're not gonna ask them to vote because they're not setting policies. It's, you know, they're an independent body, but I just want them to be aware that this change will be happening.
Yeah, if we don't have any questions, we'll go for public comment now. That's right.
Hands raised.
Hands raised, and then, so close public comment and then any motion.
I'll make the motion to recommend to the SVCE Board of Directors approve establishing a rate stabilization fund under GASB 62.
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
No extension. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
With that, we end the meeting. Any
Alright.
staff or committee remarks? If nothing, we adjourn at 5:40.
We do have a state of the city.
Yeah, I am coming.
That was,
Yeah.
Yeah, at 6:30.